So, namaste and welcome to Satsang today, whatever time it is where you are. It's always an interesting month, March, because the time zones change and it's just a really fun process. So just be aware that times may change if you're attending live events. So Satsang is, if you're new to Satsang, new to me, then welcome. If you're new to Satsang officially, you've been in Satsang your whole life, and we're just coming to consciously realize this now, work with this thing that's already happening in a more productive way, perhaps. So part of that was something that came up last night in the Awakening Together session that I did, and it's come up several times, this subject, this week alone. So it's always a sign to me that it'd be helpful to kind of bring forward and speak about when it comes up several times like that. And so I thought I would, because it also helps with the main aim of Satsang, which is to directly come to see exactly what we really are rather than what we think we are, and to come to not only a direct understanding that's in the heart, but that would also become an experiential lived from understanding, realization, not just some thing that we've seen, but that we've seen so clearly that it begins to be lived as our life, that our life begins to change in perhaps subtle ways at first, that gathers more momentum. And this subject really is pivotal to that. If we're all coming initially to Satsang, at least trying to achieve some kind of awakening experience that becomes more and more permanent until it's effortless and stable, living beyond and before and inside the mind, so that we're not suffering from our thoughts. We're not being pulled around. Our attention isn't dragged constantly to wherever the mind goes. And again, I don't want to make mind an enemy. It's actually a very useful thing. But if we have no choice but to follow it with our attention, then it will feel like an enemy. It will seem like it's out to torment us. And then really, perhaps one of the most challenging aspects of awakening for me was actually coming to notice when it was already unfolding, when it was actually already happening. So, later, when we put this on YouTube, if we title this something like how to recognize when you're enlightened, if I'd have seen something like that, I mean, I don't know what the title's going to be, but if I'd have seen something like that as a seeker, I probably would have dismissed it completely, because I was so sure that I would know when it was happening or had happened. And of course, all the the stereotypes of that come into focus when we talk about how would you recognize when awakening has happened for you? How would you recognize? How would you know? Of course, my mind at the time said, well, obviously I'd know, because I would be very different than I am now. At that time, I was very disturbed, extraordinarily disturbed, and perhaps disturbing to be around, I should imagine. And I was, of course, like everyone, perhaps, or most of us, looking for some big experience, some happening that would show me that I had recognized clearly what I am, and that I was living as that. I expected some kind of magical change in my outer circumstances, where everything just melted away, all my problems melted away, and there was just, fun times, so to speak. And it became clear after a while that that wasn't how it was going to happen. But what didn't become clear was literally how to recognize when I was recognizing. So what were the signs that I could look for that I was actually really starting to live from this place? Because they might not be what you think. And as crazy as it sounds, somebody had to tell me in hindsight, I hadn't noticed that I wasn't suffering anymore. And I hadn't noticed that I was living in a very different way than I was when I was seeking. So I thought it might be useful to kind of put some attention on this, because it came up again last night, as I said, and several times this week. Like, how would you actually know when your awakening is succeeding? What would that look like? Because if we don't know what to look for, then we might go right on past it. And perhaps at least 60%, maybe 70% of the time I spend talking to people when answering questions and taking them through things is actually spent trying to get them to see how far they've already come. Because this seeking mechanism, this forward movement of egoic, the someone that we take ourselves to be, the separate being, the person, the egoic sense of self, it's always looking towards some future moment and looking anywhere but at how we are right now in this moment. And because for most of us, awakening happens so very gradually, incrementally, tiny bit each day, but over 365 days, or even less than that, quite some profound change. But just as we don't notice how our body's growing so much, or our minds changing so much as we educate ourselves in the world and other things, we might not also notice how deep our awakening has actually gone. What would that actually look like? And, you know, looking at that and knowing what to look for. For me, the willingness to actually stop and see if I could have already been much further down the path of living this than I realized took a very long time to come. I was so sure that I wasn't where I needed to be. Even when people were pointing this out to me, you know, Helen, you're actually very different than you used to be. My family and everyone else, I was still moving in this direction towards some future moment. Actually, one of the most challenging things was to put the brakes on that and switch that willingness to keep moving forward to a willingness to look and see, could it actually already be unfolding? And I'm aware there might be a lot of resistance to hearing this message, because, you know, I would have been the same. Of course, I'll know when I'm there. And I'm certain right now that I'm not there. You know, that's what our mind is 100% convinced of most of the time. So let's take some practical examples, and hopefully this will become clearer. If we look at spiritual practice itself, let's take meditation as an example, or self-inquiry, or any spiritual practice at all. We could be listening to bhajans, we could be chanting some mantra, we could be praying, we could be contemplating, we could be attending an event like this, attending sanghas, meetups in between. But one sure sign that awakening is deepening and progressing is why we're doing those practices. So I'm sitting down to meditate each day. First, and I'm just going to use my own example because that's all I've got really. First, when I started meditating, it was to wake up, to become enlightened, to be special, to be somebody, which is kind of funny now looking back, to be liked, to be approved of, to be loved, to feel safer. On and on it went. And then gradually, the reason for sitting in meditation. And when I'm saying meditation, you could substitute anything, any practice I was doing, reading books, whatever. The reason began to change, and it was so subtly. There was still, for quite some time, this someone that wanted to be special and wanted to be the most enlightened being that had ever walked this planet. I was going to be the most enlightened person of all. Before I understood, obviously, that, you know, it's not a person that wakes up, it's the awakening that awakens. But subtly creeping in was this other motive, which was to meditate because I could reach some really nice states. So when I got quite good at meditation, I would start to feel a lot more peace and sometimes bliss, and it wouldn't last outside of meditation at that point, but it just felt so nice. So just give myself a half an hour break, 20 minutes, whatever, from the seeking itself. Still, this motivation to be someone special was there. And then an even more subtle reason was because I'm going to meditate because it feels like the right thing to do. It's what my body seems to want to do, to just sit. And also because it felt good, and also to be special. And then even later than that, to meditate because it's what seemed to be already happening. I found myself my body just sitting down. This is apparently what I'm supposed to be doing right now. Or there's some recognition of awareness, being aware of awareness happening spontaneously. And also because it felt good, and also to be special. And then even later still, this wanting to be special began to drop off. But these other three motives were still there. I wasn't managing this process. I didn't even know this was going on. The change in reason why I was doing the practice. And then eventually not feeling like I was even choosing. And I was also choosing. So choosing and not choosing, both feelings going on at the same time. If I'm supposed to meditate, I will. If I'm not, I won't. And also meditating because it feels really nice. It's getting quite profound in my meditations. So this was going on over a couple of years, and startlingly, I looked one day and actually, I was actually in the middle of just sitting, just found myself sitting. And I realized there was no other reason for doing that other than it just felt good. It just felt good to sit in meditation. It was quite shocking that somewhere along the way, this someone that was trying to become something special so that she could be liked and loved and feel safe and all of that had fallen away. And that was really shocking. I was so certain that I would know when that happened. The same activity going on, but for a profoundly different reason. And organically, that had just fallen away along the way. And it was so very gradual. And I only noticed it one day when I decided that I wasn't going to meditate because I couldn't be bothered, didn't want to, just had so much resistance. And something within me didn't beat myself up over that. So the other side of this is when something comes up like this, some emotion arises, some old trigger happens inside. First reason for me as a seeker, obviously I'm not enlightened enough. This would not be happening if I was awakened. And then the second reason that gradually crept in, well, it's coming up so that I can look at it deeper. And then the next time a trigger arose, there was this embracing of it more. And then the next time it's just coming up so that I can transmute this energy, but also because I'm not awakened enough. And gradually, again, over a couple of years, it got to the stage where there's just this energy arising because it needs to arise apparently, and I'm going to just either inquire into it, or I might ask a contemplative question, or I might do nothing at all with it. I might just feel it, and I've got no idea which one of those it's going to be. And after even more time, I looked in that sense that this was coming up because of doing something wrong and not being awakened enough had fallen away again. Couldn't tell you when that happened. And it was just absolutely shocking to me that the thing that I'd wanted for so long, that my whole life had been focused on, that all of my time and energy and attention that I had spare went towards trying to get to, that I wouldn't have noticed that it had already happened. It's not a happening, but it already unfolded. And I was actually living in a place where something arose, a mistake was made, and I forgive myself immediately. An emotion arose, some old pattern. I said something I shouldn't have. There was nothing within me that could hold on to that. It was seen, it was looked at, it was whatever I could get out of it was getting learned from it, gotten out of it, and it was dropped. And that was quite extraordinary to me, that I could be living like that, because it happened so in these tiny, tiny increments every single day. So I'm going to invite you to look at your life right now. Why are you in this satsang right now? What reasons are there? And there might be someone who's trying to get something from it, get somewhere and be awakened. There might be another reason that it just feels nice to get together with like-minded beings. There might also be a deeper recognition that I just feel more complete and still and full when I join in with something like this. And then it might also be this other reason that you just found yourself here. Maybe you didn't even intend to be here today, but somehow the body showed up anyway. So can you recognize in that this varying, changing, very subtly perhaps, just like a child grows a little bit bigger each day and they won't realize until you stand them up against the wall and go, look, this is where you were and now you're here. Could you be in a very different place than where you think? Would you even notice? Would you know how to notice? Because if we can't recognize when we are living as what we're so desperately trying to move towards, what's the point in all of this? It didn't really occur to me that the seeking mechanism might continue after awakening, actually, just running on by itself on autopilot. And if my attention's on that, it might continue forever. I might not notice what's actually happening here. And there were a few moments where somebody pulled out in front of me in the car and, put the brakes on, and it was just close to call for a second whether I was going to be able to stop in time or whether I'd hit them. This is years ago. But there was this absence of fear. There was just this, oh, well, I'm either going to hit them or I'm not, in this split second. And in that moment, there was a recognition, wow, that's really different to how I would have felt afterwards. I would have blamed myself for, how I was driving, how I would have got angry with them, how they're driving, and there'd been a lot of fear, all of that. But because of my attention was still on this forward-seeking mechanism, that experience is very quickly forgotten, and I went back to assuming that I'm not there. And I'm saying all of this because pretty much everyone I meet is a lot further along than they let themselves recognize. The fact that you turn up to satsang when you could be doing so many other things, whether you're watching this later on YouTube or here and live on this session, you've made this time to be here and hear this message. And quite a lot of human beings wouldn't even value this as something worthwhile doing. Again, no fault of theirs, no blame, just they're not ready for consciously being in satsang yet. So the last time you sat to meditate or attended a satsang or dealt with some intense emotion, did you handle it differently? If you look back 2 years ago, can you see how you would have handled it then? Your reason? What's your motivation for being here in this Zoom session right now? Is it different than it was? Are there more motivations present than they were initially? Is there something ever so subtly changing, that we might have to really sort of put some willingness into to recognize. Because as we start to recognize that I am actually living in a different way than I would have been before, and that begins to speed up and accumulate, only when we're willing to see that. It's much easier to the momentum to of the habit to keep on assuming that we're not where we need to be yet, and keep chasing some future experience. It's very, very rare, extraordinarily rare. And I don't think we'd really want it anyway, that awakening happens as some big bang explosion where all my karmic patterns shatter in one go. I mean, we think we want that. But in actuality, if we've got to get up for work the next morning and we're just sitting there so blissed out, we don't know where our body is that really going to work? Maybe awakening is how it's unfolding, is shifting for our generation of seekers so that we can still function and do what we need to do in the world to take care of what we need to take care of and who we need to take care of, and still pursue this thing that we want more than anything. So, are you willing to see where you're already at? And it doesn't mean you're going to stop, you're going to let go of the unfolding. That's just going to go on more and more effortlessly on its own. Still, even today for me, there's deepening going on, seeing things clearer that need to be seen and all of that. But the reason that that's happening is totally different than it was. And it's a part of self-love, this that we're talking about, isn't it? Am I willing to actually recognize where I'm already at or could be at? Am I willing to be wrong about how far I've got in this? Not that it's a journey, but how much I'm actually already allowing the truth to flow through and as me. Would somebody meeting me for the first time have the same opinion about me as I do? Would they say I'm much more peaceful, seem to be quite chilled out, more relaxed? Really starting to show the signs of a full realization, whatever that is. Where if I blame myself for something, it's okay. I'd rather not do it, but there's no blame about the blame. It's just okay, that happened, and there's an acceptance. Or if I do blame myself, it's dropped in 10 minutes instead of 10 hours. And it's always good really to have a Sangha around you for this, because they'll point out to you just how different you are. Sangha just meaning, well, the root of the word is similar to Satsang, to sit down together in the truth, near the truth, with the truth, as the truth. So just inviting you to be willing to see what's actually happening for you, rather than to keep this allegiance with this idea that you're not there yet. Letting go of dangling a carrot in front of you is not going to stop this unfolding. In fact, it's going to speed it up. This awakening is not driven really by the separate seeker who wants to wake up. It's driven by the self that's recognizing itself. So we don't need that carrot anymore, perhaps. And we certainly don't need a stick. Maybe we're way past that and we haven't noticed. And I know this may sound really bizarre when all of our efforts and focus are on how to make sure we get there, that somebody along the way would stop saying, just slow down a minute and check where you're at. You might have reached your destination and kept on running right past it. Have you ever done that with your sat nav, where you forget to turn it off because perhaps you're looking for a particular house number and you go further down the road and the GPS, the sat nav, saying, turn around where possible. Here is this thing or make a U-turn, whichever one it says. Here is this thing right here in spiritual unfolding. Are we willing to actually turn around and look at how we're already living, noticing? Whichever way we come to do that. For me, journaling has always helped. You know, it's really, and if it's not your thing, that's fine. But, you know, find some way. If I go pick up a journal that I was writing 2 years ago, and it's like, wow, this is a different person. It's like a different lifetime. And you can really see the difference in those 2 years. Or even 2 weeks ago, if you flick back 2 weeks ago, what you were struggling with and what's come out of that since. When I look back at 2 years ago, 10 years ago, there's this shifting from this is where I want to get to. All my writing was about years and years ago, where I want to get to, where I am not already. And then the softening now of this is what's unfolding for me right now. And I'm saying this in as many different ways as I can to try to find some way, some chink in the armor of the seeking mechanism, or our belief, our allegiance with this seeking mechanism. Because it might just run on forever, left unchecked. And it's totally okay to admit that awakening is happening for you. There's nothing arrogant about that. In fact, it might even be prideful or arrogant to assume that we're the only ones that are not getting it. When there is no separate seeker already, it must be happening, right? The self wakes up to the realization of its infinite nature by degrees, usually. What could stop that if there's no separate being in the way? So I'll leave it there because I could go on a long time. But it might surprise you just to look. It might surprise you what I spend most of my time doing as a teacher, which is trying to get people to slow down and look. So, okay, I'll read a couple of questions that have been sent in. If you would like to ask a question here on the session, feel free to raise your hand. I'll come to you very soon. This one says, Dear Helen, my question is, why do we insist on believing our stories of unworthiness, lack, sickness, pain, etc.? If they are lies, if someone were to come to me right now and tell me that who I think I am is not who I really am, and that my father is a king of some sort, living in the most beautiful palace in a wonderful and most happy country, and that I am his daughter, most probably I wouldn't hesitate a second and accept my new status and truth at once. In a way, it's as if somehow we choose to believe these lies after all the information that's been given to us through so many means and the many genuine teachers. Do we unconsciously use these stories to keep ourselves separate from love? Or perhaps is that in a way we like being, a way that we like being the separate self, even if we feel miserable and victimized at times, etc. What's really going on with us? Thank you for your wonderful teachings. So good question. Like, why is this going on? You know, why am I still running down the road after the seeking mechanism? That's kind of what we were just talking about. When I looked at this for me, for my own journey, why am I still believing these stories? It usually came down to some unconscious, as you said, well, it was conscious, but it was I didn't want to look at it. I'd seen it, but I didn't want to. Something that wanted to keep suffering, something that wanted to keep telling stories, something that enjoyed being upset and being the victim or being unworthy, something deep down inside that didn't want to progress. And as I looked at that in myself, I began to develop the willingness to look at it. It came down to that, and also just sheer force of habit, momentum of habit. This is me, this is my stories, And this is what I do in this situation. This is what I tell myself when this person speaks to me this way, or when I do this thing wrong, this is what I say to myself. It was just this overwhelming force of habit. And also this unwillingness to admit that I might have seen much more clear than I recognize what I already am. So some part of me enjoyed, I say that very loosely, enjoyed suffering, and still wanted to perpetuate that. And it really only stopped when I stopped blaming myself for that. If that's all that part of me has ever known, then why would it even feel that there's anything else? My real self can see there's something very different, but that part of me that keeps wanting to go there, then can we just accept that that's part of us too? Do we have to push that away? And I don't really think, if someone showed up and said, oh, by the way, you've been living this wrong life, and you're actually the daughter of this rich king, and I'm going to take you away to this palace, even it was like the best thing, the best new life you could ever dream of, I really don't think by this point that you would automatically believe that. And I know it's a example, it's a metaphor, but by the time you end up in something like this kind of satsang, you're already really engaging your discernment mechanism. In fact, the fact that you even ask why we still believe stories shows that you're seeing why is I'm outside looking at something, buying these stories. I'm watching, story pops up and something goes with it, some allegiance to this story. So hopefully that gives you something to look at. It'd just be sheer force of habit. We are definitely creatures of habit, human beings. And some of those habits are helpful and some not so much. Okay, so I'll read this one and then I'll come to Robin. Hi, Helen. I've never really felt the need to ask a question or look for guidance before. I felt I was progressing and listening to you and some other non-duality teachers and was gaining a degree of insight, peace, periods of bliss, and frequent glimpses of what I take to be the true nature of our realization. But I was aware that there was nothing really coming to the surface to be looked at, i.e., no negative feelings or emotions surfacing. Recently, I was introduced by a friend to a non-teacher of Neo-Advaita, whose message I find disturbing and uncomfortable, to say the least, i.e., there's no teacher, no practice, nothing to be done, nowhere to go, no enlightenment, and no realization, because there's nobody here and nobody to be enlightened. And that 99% of Advaita teachers are talking nonsense when they say that meditation and other practices can help move towards awakening, because there's no one to be awakened or enlightened, and the individual can't really do anything. All that there is energy, whether negative or positive, and it is identification with the energetic emotion that causes the suffering. This message has really poked the bear, so to speak. I concur with the message that identification with emotions causes the suffering, but I don't know how not to identify with the emotions. I'm not so sure whether this message is something that I am supposed to hear now and is an invitation which is provoking an examination of deeply held fears and beliefs which are blocking some release, or whether this could lead to a downward spiral into despair and depression that I won't be able to come back from. I don't know why, but I don't feel any optimism in this teaching at all. Is this my ego trying to hide? Should I be facing the fear anyway? Grateful for any help or insight. Thanks. Well, it sounds to me like you're facing the fear anyway. The fact that you wrote in and sent this in shows that you're facing this, you're looking at this. Would you really even ask this and ask for help with this if you were just that teacher's not for me, I'm just going to shove that over to the side there and not really ever look at that person again? I don't like that style of teaching. And I'm doing this because this is what I did. I'm explaining. And that doesn't resonate with me, it's not my thing. So it's brought up, hearing this message has brought up some deep existential fear, you've said, and depression that I haven't felt for years. So again, like anything, whatever prompts or seems to prompt this thing to come to the surface, we can look at the stories behind that. What's the story behind this existential fear and depression? And from a certain place, this kind of Neo-Advaita message is extraordinarily helpful. There is no doer. There's nothing to do. There's no one to do it anyway, and there's nothing to achieve. Is technically true and absolutely true. But it also negates the fact that infinite self is appearing as a human being in which there seems to be a sense of choice and a sense of what to focus on. And that when a human body appears, there's a sense of focus. I can choose to put my attention on this or on this, on illusion or truth. This message, when it's sometimes heard, when there's still a lot of fear in the system, is going to make it seem like there's just no point in even trying. There's nothing I can do anyway. I've just got to live like this. And here's the despair and the apathy. My whole journey is pointless. There's no one, and I've been through this stage too. That's why I can talk to you about it. There isn't a separate being. What the hell are we all doing in Satsang anyway? What's the point in all of this? But you are the infinite self showing up as a human being for a reason. It's not an accident that you have this discernment capacity to seemingly sort through two opposites. So to me, there's two things going on here, at least. This just isn't the right teaching for you right now at this moment. It doesn't resonate with you. And are you listening to that intuition? Something inside is saying, this is right for some beings, but not for me right now. And now you're listening to that. You probably find you're overriding that. And also, this is stimulating some release of some trapped emotional energy for me to look at deeper. So in a way, it is the right teaching also. It's not necessarily what I want to look at, but it's what I need to look at. And they're not always the same things. I could quote many thousands of times when I sat and did a nice guided meditation instead of really looking at what I needed to look at, because the guided meditation would make me drift off into a nice place that felt beautiful. Meanwhile, I hadn't actually grown because I just avoided looking at what was coming up for me that day. So what does the depression say? It's hopeless. There's no point. Real apathy, despair, existential fear. What is that existential fear saying? I'm doomed, right? There's nothing I can do. I'm going to cease to exist at any moment, and there's nothing I can do to deal with that. No wonder when we believe that there's this terrifying fear. Of course we would feel that. And all of our human life usually has been about avoiding looking at that. So half a message, there's the other half. There is no seeker. There's nothing to be sought. You already are what you're looking for. All of that is true. But as a human being, you have the choice to consciously live as that. There is no free will as a separate being. But as the self, you have infinite choices. So it's showing up as a human being, hearing this message right now in this moment, the self, for a reason. What is that reason? To make a different choice as the self. What does it mean to be the self when something like this happens? It means to compassionately look as the awareness, as the self, at what's going on in the mind and the body. From the self that's not judging. What is this showing me? What is this for? Maybe I've never really dealt with these stories And this thing has brought them back to the surface so I can look at them. And that need not be a frightening or hard thing. That's another story in itself. These are the big stories, and they're going to be really difficult to look at, but nonetheless, it's not true. So have a ponder on what I've said, and if you want to go into it more detailed, please do write back in. It's brought some stuff up for you to look at, and perhaps it's not also the right teaching for you right now. And when we tend to override our intuitive guidance, we will always feel terrible, always. So, okay. Robin, when you're ready.
Hey, Helen.
Hi.
This week I've been triggered by some things which were said to me in the sanghas, and I was inquiring into it, and this has been going on for quite some time, not just with sanghas, even before I became involved with your teachings. And I'm sort of puzzled by it, because it seems the more I progress, continue, advance on this spiritual path, the more easily I get triggered by what people say to me. And I find this very puzzling. I was thinking, what if whatever anybody said about me, whether positive or negative, I was okay with it? Wouldn't it be nice just to be nobody and not to care about what people say to me? But it doesn't seem to be like that. It just seems to be getting worse. When I inquire into it, it has something to do with not being good enough or comparing or this type of thing, which I've looked into. I realize this is a core pattern, but I never seem to come to an end of it, into it, if you know what I mean. So that's why I'm seeking your help and asking you this question in front of all these people with my camera on.
Which is very brave, by the way. It's and first thing I want to say is, I noticed that you didn't say that it means you're not as far along. You actually said and I'm paraphrasing, the further I get into this, the more this is unfolding, this is still happening. So it's excellent already that you haven't gone to, oh, this means I'm not progressing. This is really really a deep sign of awakening, being much more of a lived thing for me, that you didn't go there. You didn't use it as evidence that you're not progressing, which is really good. And instead the question was, why is it bothering me more now? So that's something we can look at. And it was the same for me, of course. Things that I thought I dealt with, and this also was a big thing for me, huge thing for me. When someone would say something, there was this inner reaction, and there was also this pushing away of the inner reaction. And what you said, why can't I just not care? Something like that, right? And again, I might have got the exact words wrong, but why do I still care what people say and think and notice? Something like that, right? So maybe awakening is different to that. Maybe living as a self here means something different than we've realized. Maybe I can get to a place where I don't so much care that I still care, or I'm not pushing away the trigger or the response inside when something happens. So perhaps imagining that I can get to a place where I just don't feel any impact when someone says something mean or hurtful or does something, maybe that's an unrealistic place. Maybe I can get to a place where I'm very forgiving of my triggers when they come up. I'm accepting, I'm immediately willing to look at them. And maybe you're already at that place. Can you see the difference? What if this is something that just follows you forever? And something gets poked, something comes up and you go, oh, there it is again. And that's kind of the only thing that happens. Quite possibly you can get to this place where you're not triggered by anything anyone says. But this intermediary stage first. where I'm not trying to get rid of that trigger when it pops up. Maybe there's something else there. And maybe it's not even a trigger now. Maybe it's something deeper. Maybe it's some kind of guidance that's happening, intuition. How does that feel when you ponder that?
Yeah, I can see that. I have a tendency, which I don't like to admit, but when I'm triggered by somebody, particularly if someone who I have a relationship with or I trust or whatever, I don't react to them verbally or physically or whatever, but I avoid contact with them. I avoid them basically, which is my usual tendency basically. I'm just bringing that up because as you're talking, it's resurfacing in my mind.
Yeah. So can you love that? Can you love the fact, can you accept the fact that you tend to avoid that, or you would like to avoid that?
Yes. Okay.
Can you come to peace with that? Maybe some part of me is always going to back away from this a little bit. And is that a bad thing, or is that, could it also be some intuitive recognition that this is going to be much easier resolved in myself as I accept myself here in this moment fully, that the outer circumstance will change anyway. As I'm more loving to myself, this other being is going to have to be more loving to me. As I'm rejecting myself inside, saying, why am I still doing that? You know, some version of that. Why is this, going on? Then I'm going to have to keep experiencing the same old thing in my, different people, but the same pattern. So could this only be about you falling more in love with yourself already? It's not necessarily anything wrong that you don't really want to say to someone something quite direct. Maybe you'll never be that kind of person that can or wants to say something like that. Maybe you'll always kind of deal with it internally, quietly by yourself. And maybe just move away from someone non-confrontationally rather than saying something. Could that be about accepting maybe that's just how I am and there's nothing wrong in that?
Yeah, and I understand, Helen. Yeah, I haven't seen it that way.
Subtle idea of how we think we should be when awakening has deepened. Maybe I'll always be able to go up to this being and say, I'd rather you didn't say or do or imply, whatever. But maybe that doesn't happen. Maybe that's not a realistic place for you. And maybe it doesn't need to be. That's what I'm kind of trying to drive at there.
I understand what you're saying, Helen. It's more about self-acceptance, wherever I am, really.
Yeah. And I've not really found too many beings who are interested in waking up to the truth that are really happy with confrontation or conflict. Just intuitively, it's not that we're avoiding it out of some resistance. It's not what I want. And if there's an easier way where I don't hurt that person's feelings either, don't poke them either to resolve this, but not from how we used to do, which is, I really don't want to look at this. I'm just going to accept them treating me badly and hope it changes. There's a difference in that, isn't there? Now there's the wisdom to say, maybe they can't hear me anyway if I say it. Maybe the resolution is inside me anyway. It always comes back to self-acceptance and love, doesn't it, eventually, somewhere?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Helen.
Thank you. Wonderful. Nancy? Hi.
Sorry, faffing with the buttons. Hi, Helen. Yeah, I only joined your Satsang, your Sangha, in January, and I found your teaching so helpful in helping me make sense of everything I've learned before. I've been doing yoga and what have you for like 10 years, but I had got to a point where I was like, I don't feel like a lot of the practices I'm doing are taking me to where I need to go. So now I do feel like, oh wow, this really kind of knits in with what I'm already doing. So that's amazing. But
Good.
my question, which you're like, what's the question?
It's
What I've
okay.
noticed, what I've noticed is that what's absent from your teaching, which I see in most other forms of spiritual teaching, is there doesn't seem to have been any mention of like any kind of moral code, for want of a better word. Like Patanjali has got his yamas and niyamas,
Mhm.
and most spiritual systems have something like that. And I, based on everything I've seen in what you would maybe term the spiritual community, I have seen a lot of abuse and poor behavior, quite often justified by some like kind of misguided idea of some kind of spiritual guidance. So yeah, I guess my question is, are you taking for granted the fact that we will be aware of these kind of codes and follow them, or is there some other reason that you never refer to this, or maybe you have and I just missed it?
Usually, in my own awakening and with helping other people, if we have some code or ethics, or as you pointed to, the 8 limbs of yoga, focusing on, there's just one example, focusing on non-violence and all of that. That's useful to a point, but I tend to find that people who end up in a satsang like this already have a strong sense of what is right and wrong, and not in terms of the mind, right and wrong. Mind's, sort of judgments of right and wrong, but we already are very loving towards others, very compassionate, usually. There's always exceptions to that in any spiritual group, but that it's not that it's not needed. It's just not needed externally from a teacher figure, because it's already arising inside anyway for most of us. Intuitively, with recognizing who we actually are, the infinite self comes from that, and coming to live as that. There's a kind of self-regulation that comes from that anyway. So naturally, as you're waking up to being what you are and living as that more, you're going to find it much harder to be unkind to yourself or anyone anyway, or to do some actions that perhaps you would have done before in the past. They just don't feel authentic from what you really are compared to what we thought we were. So, I mean, we could focus on that, but it's been my experience over and over again in teaching that the moment you say to anyone, you should not do this, that's exactly what they want to go and do anyway. Or I've done that myself 100,000 times. If I say to someone, you should refrain from doing this, or then there's something within us that rebels against that anyway. So a lot of my teaching is focused on releasing the beliefs that are stuck inside us that we're still agreeing with, usually those that come with being a separate being. And those are the beliefs that are going to reflect as behavior that we wouldn't want anyway in ourselves and others. So I find it more helpful and faster and more direct to point to the cause of these things rather than some external mechanism to try to control those or change those. I don't know if that answers or points to what you were asking fully. And if not, please do ask again.
Yeah, I guess so. So it's kind of like a form of spiritual anarchy, where your belief in the system and what the system is about is so strong that you think only good things can arise from it. So there would actually be no need for rules because they would be redundant.
Good things or learning experiences.
Yeah. So
because you know, I used to follow certain old scriptures and things like that, and it would always be, you shouldn't eat this, you shouldn't have sex, or you know, you should control this and control that, and it just didn't resonate with. I sat with it for a long time. But then I remember, I can't remember for the life of me where I heard it, but someone, one of the teachers said, let these things arise naturally anyway, because they're going to. Then they're not from the outside in, and from the inside out. In terms of an actual sign of awakening, deepening is, I don't want to drink so much alcohol. I don't want to stay up later than I should do. There's a respect for the body, a respect for the mind, you know, things like that develop on their own. That's just an example, but if we say shouldn't so much, then we might take away those learning opportunities.
Yeah, I mean, I just find it very hard to, I mean, you know, I'm not alone in this. I find it very hard to reconcile the behavior of people who are supposedly enlightened masters. And you think, what are you doing? You know, like, this doesn't conform with any idea of what, you know, truthfulness, non-harming, you know, like, so, you know, just calling it for what it is, you know, whether it's sexual abuse or grooming or child abuse or, you know, all of that stuff. I've seen it go on, and, you know, yeah, it has led me. What's interesting is it's led me to question, you know, well, what is enlightenment then, if people who are claiming to be enlightened and other people are saying are enlightened are doing this stuff? And then, yeah, I mean, I'm still here.
There's, and obviously the self that you are, the infinite self, won't let you go away. But there's a difference between, in my experience, I've seen evidence of some teachers that do things that I certainly wouldn't feel was in alignment with what they're saying and what they're asking other people to do. Let's say the behavior is different than what they're advising. And in the end, for me, it always came down to, first of all, is this teaching useful? Is it having a positive impact in my life? And does it feel authentic? Does it feel as if it's guiding me in a direction I want to go? Most of all, perhaps, is it coming from that teacher's experience? Are they teaching from their direct experience? Because there's a big difference between seeing the truth and allowing that to fully take over your life, to express itself as your life and embody it in a very full way. And sometimes there's the difference. Some parts of our lives we hold back. We don't want to. I don't want to sort of name any names from I don't really want to do that, but there's some inauthenticity in some beings in that way. And it's totally okay that you don't like that or don't want that. It's totally on purpose that you don't like or want that. You know what you want. And that's helping you get clear on it, isn't it? What do I want then in my spiritual pathway? It's not this. Okay, what is it then?
Yeah, I suppose my point is, a lot of people get a really long way down the path before this stuff comes out, which again is a teaching. But I suppose my feeling is that if there was a system of accountability, you know, in the human realm, in the temporal realm, I think that might help some people stay on track. I think it seems to me like the teaching is so powerful that the further you go down the path that, you know, somebody like you, who is seen as a guru and a teacher, ultimately you're always ever going to be human. And sometimes I think people can just end up thinking that they're not accountable, and that they're somehow, that their, you know, actions are divinely inspired or that guided or whatever, when really it's like, that's not actually what's happening here, is it? I mean, who are you accountable to?
Well, I tend to hold myself to higher standards than anyone else. I'm constantly vigilant and will be forever on am I applying what I'm teaching? And that's just how it's always been. And that's, you could say I'm accountable to God, I don't know, or to the self. Whenever I make a decision that isn't in my best interest and everyone else's, something immediately shows up in a manifestation to show me that I've done that. And there's a course correction in that. For me, there's just this sense of what seems to go wrong for us, a lot of beings, is when they let their own intuitive guidance be overridden by someone else's, usually some kind of spiritual authority figure in that. So if we're always listening to our own guidance, and the Buddha said this too, and many teachers have said it, you know, if the truth comes from a small child, and it seems to resonate more than what's said from someone teaching non-duality. If someone supposedly teaching non-duality says something that doesn't resonate with you, then there's a reason why. Perhaps just to check if that's resistance to the message, you know, coming. But if it's not resistance, there's a reason why you don't resonate with it. And that should always be your first go to, your own intuitive sense of what's right and wrong for you right now in this moment. Should always be, that's what we should put on the pedestal rather than some other being, some teacher or teaching or something like that. That's when we tend to fall into trouble, isn't it? When we don't do that, we allow someone else to override our guidance.
I don't know actually what the examples I'm thinking of are teachers who, I mean, I'm going to name names because he's been dead for 16 years, Yogi Bhajan, who, you know, he ultimately wasn't accountable to anybody. And I feel like he wasn't led astray by a particular person. It's my feeling that he was able to perpetrate the kind of abuse that he did because he wasn't accountable to anybody. Everybody was beneath him. He always had an answer. He always was able to obfuscate, and, you know, yeah, at the same time, you know, a lot of his teachings were amazing. So it's not that he didn't have some knowledge or some wisdom, but what I find so dismaying really is that he was able to go so far from the principles that he supposedly embodied in his personal life.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think it wasn't because he was led astray by anyone. I think it's, my feeling is, there was no one to go, what are you doing, mate?
Yeah.
Come on.
And you know, that should be that I mean, I don't know about what he taught. I've only very recently, not recently, very infrequently come across his teachings. But I've heard, you know, everyone knows of similar things that have happened, similar teachers, and again, without going into great detail, just for sake of time about that, part and parcel of that is probably 100,000 people overriding their own guidance as well, that this is not right, this is not what should be occurring. And sometimes that is it's up to our decision in any moment, isn't it? It's our guidance as to what's right for us, and it will never fail us.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, you know, without getting down to individual situations, but yeah, you're right. In a way, you know, all of his followers were complicit in like the emperor's new clothes. Nobody was prepared to go, are we sure about this? You know, this guy who's telling us how to eat, why does he weigh like 400 pounds, you know?
And I'm not saying at all that, you know, I'm not advocating what he did. I don't know what he did and didn't do, but the only control we've ever got is whether we're honoring. If someone's doing something, and it could be a spiritual teacher, it could be our boss, it could be anyone. Someone's doing something that's not in my best interest. What do I do then? And that's across life as a whole, isn't it? My body's telling me in this moment, this isn't right for me. What do I do in that? And that loops right back around to why I'm always trying to get people to see what they really are, because with that clear understanding of what we really are, then that guidance will be so clear. I need to move away here. This isn't right for me. And it won't be able to be overridden by our mind. Human beings tend to, we've seen it in the best and worst of human beings, we tend to follow who's popular rather than who is right for us. To the extent we might stay with someone that isn't really in our best interest anymore, just because they seem to be popular with other beings. You know, we want to herd together and group together. But if you've recognized what you really are and you're living like that, then you will know, and you will not be able to get away from that feeling. This is not what's in my best interest. It will be so clear that your body will just move away, even if there's resistance there. Circumstances, life will take you away from that being.
So are we saying that the people who do these things are not really enlightened? Or
I can't really comment on that. I don't know. In my own experience, in my own awakening, I've come across some beings who have seen what they are, but are not fully living as that. Which there's a gap between what they've seen and what they're allowing. Because the truth, once you've seen it, wants to permeate through your karmic patterns, through your relationships, and into your life in that. And it's up to each one of us individually, not separate, but as individual beings, how much we allow that to fully permeate our whole existence. And the safest way to do that is to never assume that that's over, to always be willing to look. What am I looking at today? And for some reason, some beings don't seem to complete that process. Some of them end up teaching, but also in all other walks of life as well.
yeah, there's a lot to think about there. Thank you. I'm not going to keep going on because I do have lots of questions, but you know, maybe I'll just think.
Well, have a ponder on what we've said, and whatever comes back up out of it, we can speak again.
Thank you, Helen.
Thank you. Blair, do you want to come and sit? Oh.
Move the cat. We were talking earlier, so I just thought I'd ask again about there being some insecurity, fear and anxiety coming up. And it's around, I think it's been brought up around the fact that there's been a lot of family stuff going on over the last week. And I said that from a very young age, I felt I didn't belong with my biological family. And you said that I was seeking from an early age, and it was looking for this spiritual family. So I just wanted to ask a bit about that, more about that. With
yeah. What specifically around that?
Well, just that sense of not belonging till you belong.
Would you mind just sitting over there a little bit? Then I've not got.
Yeah.
Otherwise, my next like.
Yeah,
Claire and I were talking before we got on Satsang about this feeling that we come across a lot, right? That there's we might not feel that we fit in the family that we were born into biologically.
Yeah.
And that maybe for a long time, and again, if I'm not remembering correctly, just say for a long time we might blame ourselves for that.
Yeah.
And then later we might, from a failure to be able to fit in, so to speak. Later, we might realize that that was happening for a reason, maybe because I perhaps not value what these beings value. That doesn't mean there's something wrong with me. Perhaps I value different things.
Yeah, it was just that, from, I remember trying to run away, thinking about running away at an early age because I didn't belong, didn't feel like I belonged, because I felt differently or thought differently or whatever it was. It was just that idea that that's okay. Yeah, which for a long time I didn't think was okay.
Because there comes a point where you can't, and it's right back to what we were saying with Nancy, that there comes a point when you're in your authenticity where you can't keep trying to bend yourself to fit into someone else's projection of who they need you to be. It doesn't mean that you don't try to get on with them or anything, right? And if you look at, some things have happened in your life recently that have brought this back up again. Why is that happening now? Well, to come to a deeper self-acceptance that you maybe knew from quite an early age what you wanted. Maybe you couldn't articulate or express that. Maybe you didn't even feel safe to in those places. But nonetheless, maybe you knew there's something within me that won't let me compromise myself.
Yeah. And also there's a sense of unworthiness coming up because I can't have these good things and this belonging in my life now because I've never had it before. So there's a core belief maybe there that I thought I didn't deserve it. That's why I didn't fit in.
Yeah.
And I'm never going to fit in. So I don't deserve the fitting in that I've got now, kind of thing.
Or there might be a hesitancy to relax into a spiritual family, a Sangha where you feel accepted and loved, because there's this, I might have to bend myself into this particular way of being, and I can't do that. Where it takes us a while to adjust to the fact that other people love us unconditionally already, that there are people that love us unconditionally that don't need us to change.
And naturally I do feel like I belong here, but I think it's just because I spent a lot of time with family over the last week that
it's all come back up again.
Yeah.
And that was a journey for me, was to accept that my biological family might want different things than I do from life, and that's okay. That doesn't mean there's anything wrong with me or them. It's just we're different, and that's okay, isn't it?
Yeah.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so we'll leave it there for today, and thank you all for your questions and your sharings. Very thought-provoking and insightful as always. Thank you. Namaste.
Thank you, Helen.
Thank you.
Thanks, Helen.